Hey guys, it's Chris here with another video, and in this video I'm going to be talking about Core Web Vitals, and in particular I'm going to be talking about a Core Web Vital called Largest Contentful Paint, which I'll just be referring to as LCP throughout the rest of this video. Ever since Google announced that they would be incorporating Core Web Vitals into their ranking algorithm, developers everywhere, just like myself, have been trying to find ways of optimizing for those Core Web Vitals whenever they're building a website. And on a recent build, I decided to take on the challenge of trying to get basically good scores according to Google across all of these Core Web Vital metrics. Now that is not very easy to do. It's something that's definitely much easier said than done, even for like a technical person like myself, let alone for like small business owners. So it is a bit of a challenge, but and requires a little bit of elbow grease to get those scores within range. Now, with all the other Core Web Vital metrics, they're generally tied very closely with just general website and server performance. And on this recent build, what I found was that LCP was a little bit different. It wasn't really strictly connected with just website and server performance. It was also impacted partially by design as well. So on this site, when I looked at Lighthouse reports in the browser, I noticed that the LCP was connected with a large hero image in the above the fold content on that page. And now what largest contentful paint is basically a measure of how long the largest element on the page or in the viewport takes to render. So when you have a large hero image above the fold, that's generally what's going to be connected with that largest contentful paint metric. So generally with images below the fold, you can always rely on lazy loading to improve your performance. But the definition of lazy loading is to essentially only load something when it comes into the viewport. And in the case of a hero image like that, it's always going to be in the viewport at the time that the page is loaded. And so by definition, you can't lazy load that type of an image. So I tried various things to improve the loading and try to get that LCP metric down, including things like resizing the image, tweaking the size, like the compression and the file size, try to get it down lower, tried preloading the image. And all these things helped very slightly, but I would say they weren't really getting me into that range where I needed to be, which is in the, I believe it's like 2.5 seconds or under range for LCP. So after a short recess, I just took a break, grabbed a coffee, and while I was on my break, I had an idea of how we can possibly use a feature of WP Rocket to improve the loading or hijack the loading sequence for the page to improve our performance scores. So WP Rocket is our choice of performance plugin for all the websites that we build. It's just very, very easy to use. It has a lot of features baked into it that you would either need multiple plugins or services for, and you may end up having to pay for some of those additional services. So I find the pricing and the feature set of WP Rocket to be just really, really strong. So that's why we use it on all of our sites. And there's a feature in WP Rocket that will help to defer loading certain assets until a user interacts with the screen. Before I continue and I jump into actually showing you how this works, there's a couple of caveats to this particular strategy. One is that it really only helps, I think, for the most part, whenever you have large images above the fold. The second is that there's a couple of different ways of implementing this, and depending on how change averse you are in terms of like the design and how closely you want to sort of respect the design and adhere to it, you may, not like one of the options versus the other. And basically, I'll give you all of them and you can choose which one you prefer or if you prefer any of them. But this is one way that I found that it basically cut down our LCP values by as much as like 40 to 50%. And got a couple of our sites that we were working on from an LCP value well above that good metric, in the 3.6 to 5.2-ish range, down into the 2.5 and under range. So I'm sure there's other ways that you can go about improving your LCP scores. This is just one thing that you can potentially just have in your tool belt in case you've exhausted all other options and you really need to try to get that LCP value down. You can use this more of a creative approach or out of the box approach to implementing something that can get you into that range. And then the last thing I want to say is that I didn't want to make this into a video or a tool that is only accessible to those who are using WP Rocket. In fact, I even discovered a way to implement this in a better way than what you would normally get with hijacking this WP Rocket feature. So what I've done is I've put together some code that essentially recreates this WP Rocket feature without the need to have WP Rocket installed. So it's basically a standalone script that you can add to your website and take advantage of the same sort of functionality and the same implementation of this particular workaround. So I'll drop a link in the description to the article that explains this whole process step by step. That article also has a link to the script that you can use to implement this on your own sites. I'll also try to drop a link to that script directly in the description below as well. So without further ado, let's jump into it and I'll show you how to go about doing this and how this all works. All right, guys, so this is the website that I'm going to be demonstrating this workaround with. You'll see that in the design, we've got a large above the fold hero image here on desktop. As this scales down to mobile, the hero image stays in the above the fold content, but it kind of moves into like a background image for this box here. So let me just show you what that looks like. So that's what it looks like there on mobile. You'll see the background image is still visible there. And let me just show you where we're at right now from the starting point in terms of performance. Here you can see in GTmetrix, we've got pretty amazing scores actually. We've got a performance score of 100%, structures 96. Our largest Contentful Paint is 465 milliseconds, right? Like under a second here, under half a second actually. And the site fully loads in just over half a second, right? So on desktop, amazing performance. We don't really have anything to really worry about. If we go into the performance tab, we'll see that we're satisfying all the core web vital metrics on desktop. Now, if we jump into Page Speed Insights, you'll see a slightly different story here. We've got all of the core web vitals are pretty much in line except for one metric, which is that largest Contentful Paint metric. In the screen that you're looking at right now, our largest Contentful Paint is 3.2 seconds. But when we first launched this site, before we did any sort of optimizations whatsoever, the largest Contentful Paint was actually a lot higher. It's probably around 5.2 seconds or so. So what you're looking at right now is what we were able to get that value down to after we did our basic performance optimization steps. So what were those optimization steps? That's probably a little bit outside the scope of what I wanted to cover in this video, but essentially it's just setting up WP Rocket and compressing all of our images through a compression plugin like Short Pixel. Setting up WP Rocket to get to this point does take a little bit of time and effort. You need to do some testing with, setting certain things, like turning certain things on and off and putting exclusions in for certain resources to make sure that nothing's breaking. And once you've gone through that whole trial and error process, then you kind of wind up where we're at right now. And now where we're at right now, it's actually not bad. I mean, for most people, this is perfectly acceptable. But if we're really trying to nail all of those core web vitals, this is basically that little thorn in our side that we're not going to be able to do much about. And the reason why we're not going to be able to do much about it is because that large hero image and the above the fold content is what this largest Contentful Paint metric is attached to. Now let me just show you that that's the case real quickly. If we scroll down on this report, we'll get to this bottom section here where you'll see the largest Contentful Paint element, and it has one element found here. If we just drop this down here, you'll see that it gives you the exact HTML element that this largest Contentful Paint metric was attached to. And if we just kind of copy this ID here and we just do a search on the page for what that ID is, this is the element here, which is basically the same element that has that background image attached to it. And let me just quickly go over what the WP Rocket feature is that we were going to use in order to improve our largest Contentful Paint score here. All right, so here we are in the back end of the site. And if we just scroll down this section to where we get to file optimization and just scroll down here to the very bottom, we have this one option here called delay JavaScript execution. Just quickly read the description here. It says improves performance by delaying the loading of JavaScript files until user interaction. Example, scroll, click. Now you can click on this link to find out more information about this WP Rocket feature from WP Rocket's knowledge base article. But basically this is really just saying, if a user moves his mouse or scrolls or clicks on the page, then any scripts that match these patterns only execute those when the user interaction is registered. So I had a very simple idea. I just said, what if we just created a very simple JavaScript file, then all it did was just add a class to the HTML element that only gets executed when a user interacts with the screen. All right, so this is what that code looks like. It's basically a single line of JavaScript. All it's doing is getting the HTML element and it's adding a class of JS user action to that HTML element. So I created this JavaScript file and I enqueued it onto the site and just added it to the list of scripts to delay after a user interaction and hit save changes. So now what we've done is essentially only executed that JavaScript file when there's a user interaction. So that class only ever gets applied to the HTML element when the user interacts with the page. All right, so how can we use this to improve our LCP score? Let's jump into the Oxygen Builder and I'll show you what we have to do. All right, so here we are in Oxygen Builder, and what we're going to need to do is just move into the mobile mode. So this is going to be less than 480 pixel breakpoint. And we're going to select that element where we've got that background included. You'll see the background here in the background image field, and we've got a background image here that's already been optimized for mobile. It's 480 pixels wide, but it's still resulting in that higher LCP value. Right, and all we're going to do essentially is just take that background image out of that element like that, and you'll see that what we've got now is we've just got a background here that's got a slight gradient to it. So that's one important thing to note about this, is that because we're taking the background image out and we're adding it in after the user interacts with the screen, you're going to want to have some sort of a fallback design-wise to make sure that there's still some design to the page, that the text is still legible, right? If we didn't have a background, it was just white, for example, then we wouldn't be able to see the text. So we want to have something to fall back on and then only have the image load afterwards. All right, and the next step is basically just to add a code block to the page where we're going to be able to add some CSS in there to trigger that background to load when the user interacts with the screen. All right, so before we jump into the code block, we need to just grab a selector that we can use to target this element. So you can either get a class associated to this box, or you can just grab the ID. I'm just going to grab the ID here, and I'm going to go into my code block. And you'll see if we go into CSS that I've already got some CSS here commented out. I just want to show you that it's the same element that we're targeting here. So if we go here like that, you'll see it's div block 326.289.50. It's the same element here. And basically what we're going to do here is we're just going to say, when the HTML element has the JS user action class, which is the class that we're adding only when a user interaction is registered, then we're going to set the background image for this element to the actual image here. So let's just comment this out. And I'm going to save this, and I'm going to show you what the results of this change are. All right, so let's run another page speed insights report here. And you'll see that what we've got now is we've got our largest Contentful Paint metric significantly lower. It was previously on average between 3 to 3.2 seconds. And now we've gotten it right near that cusp of the 2.5 second mark that we needed at. So if you look at the thumbnail on the bottom right here, you'll see that the background image is not loaded, and we still have that background gradient so that the above the fold content still looks nice. And let's check out what the experience is like on mobile in our browser here. So if we just reload the page here and we take a look at what that looks like, you'll see that the background image doesn't load immediately, but if we interact with the page here, you'll see that the background image just pops in. Now it's important to note here too that we are still loading the image on the bottom here, just below the hero, and that image is not being lazy loaded because it's technically in the viewport. So we, that lazy loading is going to essentially still load that image. So we could apply this sort of a workaround to that image as well. But before I do that, I just want to point out the fact that what we've done so far has basically changed out the design of this above the fold content by removing that background image. So that may not sit well with some people. I can understand why that may not sit well with some people. Me personally, I don't see a big problem with doing that, and my clients wouldn't really have an issue with it. But, I'm sure that there might be some clients out there that would have an issue, or some designers that would take exception to that. So let me show you what other options there are in order to still have better core web vital metrics, but without having as much of an impact on the design. All right, so if we jump back into Oxygen Builder and just select that same element that we had that background image to, what we can do is go into background, and instead of the background image that we had before, we could load a much smaller background image until the page loads and the user interacts with the page, and then load the full background image afterwards. So if we jump into the media library, you'll see that I've created a couple of versions here, one that has a bit of a Gaussian blur, another one here, if you look at the file size, it's 4 kilobytes. And you'll compare to the original image, which would have been around 24 kilobytes. This image here just has a more aggressive Gaussian blur applied to it, and it's also been saved as a JPEG in Photoshop as a JPEG at I think quality scale is like 1 or 2 or something very, very small, to get this image as small as possible in terms of file size. So if we select this image here and just hit select image, and let's just save this and load the front end and see what it looks like. All right, so now let's take a look at what that's done to our Core Web Vitals. If we run another report, you'll see that our largest Contentful Paint has gone to 2.9 seconds. So still lower than it was originally, but and it's still higher than it was when we just didn't load the background image at all. And so it's kind of a compromise between performance and respecting the original design of the page. All right, so let's load the front end now, and let's take a look at what the loading experience is like on the front end now. If we reload the page, you'll see that we still get a bit of an image on above the fold. It still looks a lot closer to the original design. It loads a lot faster because the image is very small. But if you just interact with the screen, you'll see that the image comes into focus. That transition of moving that image into focus happens really quickly that most people, I don't think, would really notice it. Another thing to point out is that we also have an image down here that was of really like a higher quality, higher resolution. And I did the same sort of blur technique to that we did to the hero onto this image here. So if we reload it, you won't really see anything different with the image at the bottom because it's off screen. But if you scroll down like this, and you reload it here, you'll notice a difference. Now, I didn't really have the time to perfectly position this image when I saved it in a lower resolution and everything, but you'll get the idea that it could work that way. And this is really more of like a concept that I'm trying to communicate versus an actual like polished implementation. But you can see how you can easily start to manipulate and hijack that loading sequence to load things however it is that you feel is going to produce the results that you want for Core Web Vitals. So I'm just going to go ahead and make the changes to the way that I would want this to load. I really want to have those Core Web Vitals in line, so I'm going to just leave the gradient background on here. I'm also going to just leave the image down here as a background color as well, or a gradient, and I'm just going to load both of these when the user interacts with the screen. So I'm going to make those changes now, and I'll show you what that looks like both in terms of a loading experience as well as the Core Web Vital metrics. So this is what we get after we've deferred loading the hero image using the user interaction loading method. And you'll see below on the thumbnail here, we have deferred loading the image below that as well. And you'll see that now our Core Web Vital or page speed insight score is up to 96. Our largest Contentful Paint has dropped down to within spec for 2.5 seconds. And let's take a look now what that looks like in the browser here. If we reload the screen, the page loads really, really quickly, and you get the above the hero content, the essential parts of the above the fold content displayed. And then once the user interacts with the screen, all of the image pops in and the page is loaded normally. So we get a more optimized loading sequence this way, but we get a little bit less coherence with the original design for the page. So another cool option that I think you can entertain as well is to set the hero image or the background image, set it up for like an image reveal using CSS animations. If you were to trigger that CSS animation on a user interaction, I think that would really create a pretty cool, neat effect. I'll give you an example of what one of these image reveal animations might look like. This is a video by Online Tutorials, and if you just watch what they do here, you'll see that they get an image reveal like this happen. Now, that's sort of an image reveal right there. If we were to just set up the hero background, so instead of you can use a solid color or a gradient, but this would essentially, the black would be that solid color gradient, and when the user interacts with the screen, you can pop in the image like that as a reveal, and that would be a pretty cool interactive effect that would both satisfy that largest Contentful Paint Core Web Vital metric, but also create a really neat branded experience. All right, there you have it, guys. That's my LCP hack. If you guys have struggled with Core Web Vitals in the past and found this video useful, do me a favor and give this video a big thumbs up. If you've got any questions or run into any difficulties implementing this on your own sites, just drop the question in the comments and I'll do my best to answer those questions. That's it for me for today. I'll see you guys in the next video.